To Shimoyama, and we're on page 688, and it's the very last paragraph in the lower right corner of that page 688. Before we do that, we're going to be getting into good old ryokan a little bit. Do you know who ryokan is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so in case for those that don't know who ryokan is, I've got some handy reminders here I'll get through very quickly. Okay, that's the Go Show. This is what I'm doing on YouTube. This is the letter R. Here we go. In Rakuji, okay, we're talking about, again, Mount Hei, okay, and we know in Rakuji is there. Onoji is at the bottom of the mountain, and at the top is in Rakuji, and Rakuji is where Dingyo ultimately ends up, right? Okay, so I'm going to go through in Rakuji, Go Kuraku-ji, Brahmanet Sutra, and they name 2 fires, and that's it. So there's only 4 things to go through here real quick. Okay, so in Rakuji, which is Dingyo's temple, okay, which got polluted by the high priest that followed Dingyo, okay. The head temple of the Tendai, which is Tentai in Japan. Tendai School in Otsu in Shiga Prefecture, Japan. This is in Rakuji, ENRYAKU-JAI from the dictionary. Located on Mount Hei, it was founded by Dingyo in 788 and given the name in Rakuji by Emperor Seiga in 823. In 749, the capital had been moved from Nara to Kyoto. According to Chinese tradition, the northeast was believed to be the demon gate, or the direction from which evil influences enter the country. Mount Hei's location to the northeast of the new capital made Rakuji ideally suited as an official temple for the protection of the nation, and it was designated as such. In 805, Dingyo returned from his studies in China, and in 806 established the Tendai School in Japan. In 822, after Dingyo's death, the school was allowed to erect a Mahayana ordination platform on Mount Hei, the first such platform in the country. In Rakuji prospered for centuries as the center of Japanese Buddhism. Several founders of Japanese Buddhist schools, such as Honen, Isai, Dogen, and Nichiren studied there. Okay, so that's in Rakuji Dingyo. Okay. Now the villain in this part of the story is going to be Ryokan. Okay, Ryokan ended up becoming the chief priest of a temple called Gokurakuji. All right. Literally, temple of perfect bliss, a temple of the true word precepts, Shingon Ritsu school in Kamakura, Japan, built in 1259 by Hojo Shigetoki, the third son of Hojo Yoshitoki, the second regent of the Kamakura government. Later Hojo Nagatoki, a son of Hojo Shigetoki, and the 6th regent of the Kamakura shogunate, invited Ryokan to act as the chief priest. Ryokan, while widely respected, had great animosity for Nichiren, who sought to engage him in a public religious debate. He conspired with authorities to have Nichiren and his followers persecuted. The temple was destroyed by fire in 1275 and was rebuilt in 1281 by the 8th regent Hojo Tokimuni as the shogunate's official place of prayer. In 1332, it became affiliated with the imperial court, and its priests were charged with the responsibility of praying for the peace of the country and the good health of the emperor. It was destroyed by an earthquake in 1433, but later restored. See also Ryokan. So here we go. Now here comes, I don't know why I don't have Ryokan. Ryokan's nickname was 2 fires for the very reason that the temple burned down. Okay, had a couple of fires that would have been difficult to explain as far as them being good fortune or being protected by the benevolent deities. Okay, so when we go in through here and he mentions 2 fires, he's talking about Ryokan straight up. Okay. and then the Brahmanet Sutra. So what happened when you guys heard me say Shingon Ritsu? Do you know what that is, or what's Ritsu? Oh, here's Ryokan. Okay, sorry, I blew it. Ryokan, also known as Ninsho, a priest of the True Word Precepts Shingon Ritsu school in Japan. Born in Yamato province, he began to study at Gakwan-ji Temple in 1232, and in the following year received the precepts to become a priest at Todai-ji Temple in Nara. So Nara was the center of all religious activity, so he was right in the middle of all the good politics. In 1240, he became a disciple of Eizon, who was revered as the restorer of the Precepts Ritsu school. Now again, generally speaking, the Precepts school is considered Hinayana. That's the 250 precepts for men and 500 precepts for women, right? That's that deal? Okay. So he's only going to mention for the 250 precepts because, you know, women were sort of extra at that point in history. All right, so in 1252, Ryokan traveled east to the Kanto region, which included the city of Kamakura, where the shogunate was headquartered, and propagated the precepts teaching there. So the Shingon Ritsu would have been a combined methodology or belief set that involved Shingon, which is true word, right? So they've got the mudras and the madras. They've got hand signs as well as the special incantations, okay, that go with Shingon. And then they add with that a rules of discipline kind of thing, like Ritsu, so precepts. So how well you behave, how well you follow the rules is okay. And the Daishonin calls that out as basically bullshit because everybody says they follow all the rules and they never do. That's every religion. Take a look at the religious lead. Generally speaking, there are many leaders of many religious groups, regardless of whether it's Buddhism or not, where once they get in a position of authority, they quit actually behaving in the way that made them pious. Okay? So, Ryokan did the same thing. Ryokan traveled east to the Kanto region, which included the city of Kamakura, where the shogunate was headquartered, and propagated the precepts teaching there. The rules for what you do to be a good Mahayana Buddhist, which had never existed before. It was made up. In 1261, he settled in Kamakura, and his activities in the Kanto region fostered a connection with the ruling Hojo clan. Hojo Tokiyori, the former regent who still held the reins of government, built Kosenji Temple and named Ryokan the first chief priest. In 1262, at the request of Hojo Tokiyori and other government officials, Ryokan's teacher, Eizon, came from Saidai-ji Temple in Nara to Kamakura, where he stayed for half a year. Eizon and Ryokan together promoted the teaching of the precepts and administered the precepts to priests and lay believers. So that he converted. His whole thing was he helped create the circumstance that brought in Rakuji to a place where it was practicing not just the Tendai belief, but it also introduced Shingon and also was giving some adherence to precepts, okay? And they were also chanting Amida. Okay, so they got really confused. Gorakuji thus became Ryokan's permanent abode. Gokurakuji thus became Ryokan's permanent abode. That's the temple that the emperor had made for him. He undertook a number of social welfare projects, building hospitals, roads, etc. The people of Kamakura revered him and he enjoyed great influence. The ruling Hojo family recommended him for a post as the superintendent of great temples. It also bestowed manors on him and invested him with the authority to collect tolls on ports and barrier stations. At the command of the shogunate, Ryokan often conducted esoteric prayer rituals to bring about rain and ward off invasion by the Mongols. During the Great Drought of 1271, Ryokan vied with Nichiren in praying for rain. You all know that story, right? And failed. After that, he Ryokan, contrived to have accusations brought against Nichiren, which eventually led to the Tatsunokuchi persecution, which Nichiren came near to being executed, and Nichiren's subsequent exile to the island of Sado. For many years, Ryokan harassed Nichiren and his disciples both openly and covertly. So the bottom line is this guy was a major enemy of the Daishonin. He had it in for the Daishonin. He tried to have the Daishonin murdered. And then when he couldn't pull that off, he had him exiled to Sado. And he fought every bit of the way to keep him on Sado and keep him from coming back. Okay? So from page 688, the Daishonin has begun to qualify all the different morphs that have occurred in Rakuji. Okay? And then we get down to this last paragraph on page 688 where he's going to start talking about what ultimately will lead to a bit of a dissertation on Ryokan. He says, therefore, we're starting the Gosho now on page 688, starting it up again, letter to Shimoyama, volume 2 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, page 688, the very last paragraph in the second column on the right side here. It says, therefore, when the great teacher Dingyo appeared at the end of the middle day of the law, he established an ordination platform. Now that this was a Mahayana ordination platform on Mount Hei for administering the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment, which would have been the Tendai teaching, okay, that culminates in the Makashikan, great concentration and insight, right? For perfect and immediate enlightenment. These precepts being one of the three disciplines, namely precepts, meditation, wisdom of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. At that time, he forthwith discarded the 250 precepts. So he quit doing like Ritsu kind of precepts. When he introduced the Mahayana ordination platform, because the only ordination platform that had existed up to that point had been a Hinayana precepts ordination platform. So everybody started out Hinayana, and then they would upgrade or convert, if you will, to the higher teaching of Mahayana. Okay, so he's saying at that time he forthwith okay. Let me start over that paragraph. Therefore, when the great teacher Dingyo appeared at the end of the middle day of the law, he established an ordination platform on Mount Hei for administering the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment, okay, which would have been the Tendai tenets for attaining Buddhahood in your present form, right? And these precepts being one of the three disciplines, namely precepts, meditation, and wisdom of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. You're with me, right? Okay, now again, that's the first 14 chapters, the theoretical part of the Lotus Sutra. At that time, he forthwith discarded the 250 precepts. So he quit doing Hinayana, is what this is basically saying. He rejected, he walked away from what had been a basic daily life thing because he was ordained originally as a Hinayana, under the Hinayana precepts. The Mahayana platform had never been created. He's the one that created it. He was the first one in the history of Buddhism to create a Mahayana ordination platform. That's what his great significance in this lineage of the truth and correct teaching is, okay? So he says, accordingly, 14 priests of the 7 major temples of Nara that had heretofore followed the ordination practices established by Ganjin, which is the precepts of the Hinayana precepts, okay, as well as the 300 or more other persons expressed their agreement and became followers of the Mahayana teachings. So he created a whole change in the hierarchy of religious authority in regard to Hinayana versus Mahayana teachings and how to go about as time goes by. Where's the truth really lie? Okay? And Chintai's already qualified the difference between the theoretical first 14 chapters and the second 14 chapters, the essential teaching, right? Okay, so this is essentially Dengyo now going to Japan and qualifying that to the whole nation. He got to the emperor, whoever was in charge, and then they made everybody, remember they were going to have this big debate. He defeated everybody in debate. They all had to end up following him, and that's why they ended up doing his ordination, their ordination process through his temple in Rakuji. It became the number one, it became the leading temple of Japan for a period of time. Right? Thereafter, the entire, it continues on page 389 in that first paragraph, just a few lines down from the top. Thereafter, the entire nation abandoned the Hinayana precepts. So what had been the status quo for the ordination of all priests of Buddhism in Japan ended because Dengyo initiated this process of there being a Mahayana ordination platform, and then 350 influential people followed him almost immediately, and then eventually the whole country stopped doing Hinayana. Okay, so this other guy that's going to follow again, Dengyo several hundred years before Nichiren, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so between that time, then there's going to be another dude that's going to come to Japan, and he's going to start to introduce Mahayana precepts that don't exist. That's from the Theravadins, so it's like somebody adapted. I don't even know what the basis of the school would be. I really don't care. It's not correct. It's not, enlightenment isn't based on following a bunch of rules. Okay, it's an inner awakening. Okay, that clarifies the truth in your own mind. Okay, it's not about following rules. You don't get there from following rules. The rule that you follow is Chantai Moku to the Gonzon. It's the latter day of the law now, right?
Yeah.
When Ryokan's around, it's the latter day of the law. Okay? Dengyo, it's not yet the latter day of the law.
Yeah.
All right? Okay, so there's the difference. Thereafter, the entire nation abandoned the Hinayana precepts. All of this is perfectly clear if one examines the documents pertaining to the administering of the precepts. So once the documents pertaining to the administering of the Hinayana precepts, you could check. Nobody kept using them. It was all switched in Rakuji. Despite all this, there are at present some priests of perverse wisdom, observers of the precepts, he has in parenthetically, who take up the old Hinayana sutras that are not Mahayana, that were cast aside long ago, and though they in fact do not observe a single precept, go about calling themselves priests of the 250 precepts, which have been abandoned. They're Hinayana, they're Theravadin, misleading the members of the court and warrior families and declaring themselves to be the teachers of the nation. When, what is more, these men in their self-conceit, now so do you understand he's qualifying, there's been a complete distortion of the truth that's occurred because of power plays by individuals that are setting themselves up in society to be better than everybody else, to be smarter than everybody else, that everybody should follow. Okay? It's the same thing that happens in all philosophies. At some point in time, they become corrupted. Okay? Because every time you have a religious belief, there are believers that start to impart the sanctity of the religious perspective and truth into the individuals preaching it and teaching it, rather than perceiving them to be exactly like themselves, and this being something that they garner from within. They keep looking for something from without. Do you understand? A teaching to be taught to them, something that they can just read, not something that they have to contemplate and actually have a fundamental change occur within their lives. What is more, these men in their self-conceit of creating Hinayana precepts go so far as to insult the observers of the Mahayana precepts by calling them breakers of the precepts or men of no precepts. Even though the precepts have been abandoned, Tendai's already gone. That's Hinayana. Okay? We don't do that anymore. Such behavior is comparable to a dog barking at a han or a monkey railing at the god chakra. At present, these priests of the precept school appear to the people of the world to be keepers of the precepts and speakers of the truth. So they portray themselves as holy men. This is the white-robed men that's mentioned in the encouraging devotion chapter of the Lotus Sutra, where that's where in the Lotus Sutra the three powerful enemies are revealed. They're revealed in the encouraging devotion chapter, right? Not peaceful practices, encouraging devotion. White-robed men will portray themselves to be arhats. Okay, he talks about that, right? That's what he's going to be accusing Ryokan of doing. And if you listen to this, at present, these priests of the precept school appear to the people of the world to be keepers of the precepts and speakers of truth. They appear. But if one investigates the truth of the matter, one finds that they are in fact the most grossly untruthful men under heaven. I say this because the texts that they base themselves on, the works called the Fourfold Rules of Discipline and the 10 divisions of monastic rules, belong wholly to the Hinayana division of the canon, not to the Mahayana. And even among the Hinayana writings, they represent the very lowest of the works on Hinayana monastic discipline. When the Buddha was in the world, he preached them as a temporary doctrine after the 12 years of the period of the Agama Sutras, which we call Hinayana, right? And before moving on to the correct and equal period of the Mahayana Sutras. So these kind of formulated from preachings of Shakyamuni between the Agamas and the correct and equal. After, this is the top of page 689. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
Am I going too fast?
No.
Okay. After, on page, top of the second column, page 689. After the passing of the Buddha, they were observed in temples devoted solely to the Hinayana teachings during the first 500 years of the former day of the law. Moreover, it was because again, the second half of the middle day of the law is when Tentai is doing his whole thing with the Makashikan, right? Great concentration and insight, right? So this now he's talking about the first 500 years. They were observed in temples devoted solely to the Hinayana teachings during the first 500 years of the former day of the law. Moreover, it's Ahinayana. Moreover, it was intended that they should be attacked and denounced by the temples devoted to the Mahayana teachings. Thus, in Japan, in the middle of the middle day of the law, they were introduced by the Reverend Ganjin as a form of training in preparation for the Mahayana teachings. So that's how they got into Japan and ended up sticking, because they were transformed from being a form of training in preparation to being an actual primary focused on tenet. When the great teacher Dingo, second paragraph, second column, page 689, when the great teacher Dingo refuted the doctrines of the precept school and converted its adherents to the Tendai school, as I had just described down here in the paragraph on page 688, the precept school should have been abolished entirely at that point in time. He says, remember I read here where everybody dropped the 250 precepts? Okay, that was Hinayana, right? Okay, but when the great teacher Dingyo refuted the doctrines of the precept school and converted its adherents to the Tendai school, the perfect and immediate enlightenment, that means, Makashikan, the precept school should have been abolished entirely. But in order that latter ages would understand just what had happened, the great teacher Dingyo dispatched some of his own Mahayana disciples to help the school survive. Now the scholars of our present age, unaware of the particulars of the situation, believe that the 6 schools of Buddhism in Japan have gone on since the beginning without ever being refuted. What foolishness, what foolishness. In other words, he's saying all this stuff that's being preached was already refuted by Dengyo hundreds of years ago. Okay? And this should not even exist anymore. It's all Hinayana, it's not Mahayana teaching. Continuing on page 689. Again, there are some followers of the precepts teaching who realize that in comparison to the talent and erudition displayed by the men of the Tendai school, their own school is a weak and juvenile affair. Bit by bit, they shift their attention to the Brahma Net Sutra until they end by stealing the great Mahayana precepts of the Lotus Sutra and incorporating them among their own Hinayana precepts. Then they turn about and deride the practitioners of the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment for being breakers of the precepts or men of no precepts. So in other words, they reestablish that there are all these rules that you got to follow or you can't be pure. They then never follow them themselves because they just behave as though they're pure and holy men. Okay? And then the entire understanding gets corrupted as a result. And that's what Nichiren stood up to and stood out against, and that's how he became such an enemy of Ryokan and the shogunate, because he was saying bullshit to all this stuff that was bullshit, and had gone and studied the history of all of these circumstances and qualified that the historical reality was not being reflected by the teachings of these other schools. So then he says, and then they're making out these people that are followers of the original teaching of Dingyo and Tentai to be people that don't follow, they have no precepts, they just don't have no rules that they live by. No, they've already gotten past the fact of thinking that rules are the way that you change your enlightenment, change your mind to enlightenment. So at the bottom of page 689, the rulers of the nation, deceived by the lofty and impressive outward appearance of the precept leaders of the time, snatch away the lands and estates that had been earlier donated to Inrakuji to the temples of the Tendai school, okay, and give them instead to the priests of the precept schools. So people left grounds and certain elements of, estate in the name of these temples, and then they just stole those lands and gave them to the precept school. So the precept school got rich off of the Tendai school of Inrakuji. And the common people likewise, as top of page 690, likewise withdraw their support and allegiance from the temples devoted to the Mahayana teaching and transfer them to the precepts temples. Though they may not set fires, they are burning down all the Mahayana temples in Japan. Though they may not be crows, they pluck out the eyes of dead men. Though they may not be crows that pluck out the eyes of dead men, they are plucking out the eyes of all living beings. They are what the Buddha called ikchantikas, who resemble arhats but commit evil deeds. The Nirvana Sutra says, after I have passed away and countless hundreds of years have gone by, the sages of the 4 stages too will all have passed away. After the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, but they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutra, and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen who, with narrowing their eyes, stalk softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice. Outwardly, they will seem to be wise and good, but within, they will all harbor greed and jealousy. And when they are asked to preach the teachings, they will say nothing, like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence. They are not true monks. They merely have the appearance of monks. Consumed by their erroneous views, they slander the correct teaching of the Tendai school of Mahayana. Okay? In this passage, in this sutra passage, the world-honored one describes what will happen in the future. Shakyamuni Buddha acts not only as a wise father for us, but as an enlightened teacher and a sage sovereign. In his one person, he embodies these three virtues of parent, teacher, and sovereign. And with his Buddha eye, he surveys the evil age of the future and describes for us how it will be. And certainly this is how it ended up being. And that's why in the Great Collection Sutra, he said out in the fifth 500-year period, the great pure law will be revealed. He said, that's why he said, everything will become so defiled that none of my teachings will have any efficacy anymore. Okay? And the pure law will be replaced by the great pure law in the fifth 500-year period. And this is all the historical crap that's going on in terms of the schools of Buddhism that actually that's sort of like a prophecy of. It actually played out that way. And Nichiren then took on the role of being, Bodhisattva never despaired, or Bodhisattva, which is the first of the four great bodhisattvas. It's on the Gohanzan. What am I thinking of? Oh God, I brain farted. I'll think of it in a moment. In his passage on page 690, his passage of description, he says, "After I have passed away and countless hundreds of years have gone by," this refers to the period of 2,000 years or more after the Buddha's passing. So in other words, the former day and the middle day have gone by. We're in the latter day. He says the sages of the four stages too will have all passed away. This refers, does it not, to the 24 successors of the Buddha's teachings, all the ones that led up to to Tentai. After the former day of the law has ended, indicates that he is speaking about the middle and latter days of the law. There will be monks. This is the middle of page 690. There will be monks who will give the appearance. God, excuse me. I can't stand this. It's, four great bodhisattvas, JK, great, four great. Oh, come on, guys. It's Jogyo, Mohengyo, Anrugyo, Jogyo. Superior practices, Jesus Christ. Superior practices, that's what I'm talking about. Sorry. Okay. Okay. We're sorry, now you know who I'm talking about. I could say them in Japanese, but I couldn't say them in English, and I don't know why. Okay. Where am I now? Where am I on the page?
689.
689.
Yeah.
No, I'm at already on 690. On
690. Oh, yeah, right.
689, I think the Nirvana.
Yeah,
okay, after no, here it is. Okay, how it will be. It's in the second column. He's just talked about how Shakyamuni foresaw the future. All right? And that's what's occurring right now. That's what he's saying here. I'm going to continue with in his passage. Okay? Okay, because I'll go down here. Bottom of page 690, first column. Shakyamuni Buddha acts not only as a wise father for us, but as an enlightened teacher and a sage sovereign. In his one person, he embodies these three virtues of parent, teacher, and sovereign. And with his Buddha eye, he surveys the evil age of the future and describes for us how it will be. So the Daishonin is seeing all of this as being an actualization of what's already been foretold. He says, in his passage of description, he says, after I have passed away and countless hundreds of years have gone by. This refers to the period of 2,000 years or more after the Buddha's passing, the former and the middle day. He says the sages of the four sage stages, too, will have all passed away. This refers, does it not, Nichiren asks, to the 24 successors of the Buddha's teaching. After the former day of the law has ended, indicates that he is speaking about the middle and latter days of the law. There will be monks, he says in the middle. This is where I got off on page 690. There will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline. Now in this latter day of the law, to whom can we point to this in this land of Japan as an example of a monk who gives the appearance of abiding by the precepts, so that the world-honored one of great enlightenment will be proved to be no speaker of untruth? Surely the sutra passage is not referring to men or women, lay believers, or to nuns, for it speaks only of monks. So he's saying there will be dudes that'll screw everything up, that are phony. There are countless monks or priests in this land of Japan, but among them those who appear to possess nothing more than the prescribed 3 bowls and 1 begging bowl, the phony ones, can be said to give the appearance of abiding by the precepts. Thus only priests who are observers of the precepts would seem to fit the description. And among all the observers of the precepts, the passage describes these men as giving the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, so it must refer to someone of the precept school. It must be, when Shakyamuni made these predictions, he must have been talking about somebody from the precept school, okay, even though it wasn't the Ritsu precept school, okay? So it says, because this Enzo is the guy that brought the precepts in, all right? He didn't have anything to do with true word. It says, they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutra, at the very bottom of the second column on 690. They will scarcely ever read or recite the sutra if this does not refer to the priest Ryokan of Gokurakuji temple in Kamakura in the province of Sagami. Then who else can we point to prove the validity of this passage? So, in other words, since Shakyamuni said it, it's got to occur. He's the sage, right? He can see the future. And if it doesn't apply to this Ryokan dude, who could he have been talking about? That's what the Daishonin just said in those paragraphical points. All right, top of page 691. Everybody's with me, right?
Yeah.
The passage goes on to say that these persons will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen who, narrowing their eyes, stalk softly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice. Outwardly they will seem to be wise and good, but within they will harbor greed and jealousy. If this is not Ryokan, the priest 2 fires, then who are we to believe the Buddha is speaking about? When he talks of a monk with 3 robes and 1 begging bowl, who stalks like a hunter or a cat? Alas, laymen, laywomen, nuns, and patrons of Buddhism in our day are like so many mountain deer or household mice who are deceived and preyed upon by the priest 2 fires, who is like a huntsman or a cat. In our present age, these people have been abandoned by the sun goddess and the great Buddha, Bodhisattva Hachiman, and the protectors of our nation, and will sink in defeat before the armies of other nations. They will be seized as mice are seized by a cat, and will die by arrows like deer before a huntsman. The laymen and warriors will be pierced with arrows and cut down with swords, and the laywomen will be taken prisoner and dragged off to foreign lands, their fate like that of Wang Chao Chun or Yang Kui Fei. And in their next existence, every one of these persons will fall into the great citadel of hell, of the hell of incessant suffering. Because I can see what will happen, I do not hesitate for fear of the great evil that may be done to me by Ryokan's patrons, but speak out against him, strongly against him. And he, the priest 2 fires, for that reason secretly works to spread slanderous reports about me here and there in an attempt to silence me. Again, it is stated in one of the sutras, those who give alms to you and will fall into the 3 evil paths. If persons, and again, there's a superscript there, point 22, if you want to know where it says that in the sutras, you can go look it up. Page 691, second column, very top. If even persons who make offerings to the arhats while the Buddha was in the world could not escape falling into these three evil paths, then how much worse will it be for those who make offerings to the deluded priests of the Hinayana precepts teaching, living in an age long after the Buddha's passing? From this, we know how serious is the offense of clinging to the Hinayana precepts. The precepts may be compared to donkey's milk, which in the end turns to excrement. Their adherents may be compared to dogs that eat the excrement of persons of the Mahayana teaching. They are like apes or monkeys, broken tiles and shards. Not very respectful. If one fails to understand what is demanded by the time and the capacity of the people, and instead observes the Hinayana precepts. And the reason he's coming down so hard on him is why? Because in convincing people to follow them, they are also convincing them to abandon the teachings of Dingyo that he's brought to Japan.
Yes.
Okay, the Hinayana or the Mahayana precepts. Okay, if one fails to understand what is demanded by the time and the capacity of the people, and instead observes the Hinayana precepts, and by the way, the Mahayana precepts are basically outlined in the Brahmanet Sutra, which came along somehow. It appeared as a Mahayana teaching after the precept school had already been done away with as a Theravada school. Okay, so if one fails to understand what is demanded by the time and the capacity of the people, and instead observes the Hinayana precepts, which should have been discarded long ago, I added that, this will act as an obstruction to the Mahayana teachings. Of course it will. It'll confuse the people. The Mahayana teachings being the correct teachings. And if one violates these Hinayana precepts, this too will invite evil consequences. In addition, the followers of the Hinayana precepts at present approximate the Mahayana precepts and combine them with their Hinayana precepts, which is like mixing cow's milk with donkey's milk, and in this way attempt to deceive the Mahayana followers. Persons who do this are great thieves. So they take the Hinayana precepts, mix them in with the Mahayana precepts, and say they're both the same thing, which they are not. Persons who do this one is part of the agamas, and the other is part of the perfect teaching, the perfect and immediate enlightenment of the Mahayana of Tentai. Okay, that's correct Mahayana. Persons who do this are great thieves. Okay, in other words, they steal the profundity of the later teachings and they try to insert them in the old teachings to say that they were always there. Okay, to give validity to the old partial teachings. Persons who do this are great thieves, great slanderers of the law by changing things around as though they've got the right to do that. Considering the offense they are committing, even Devadatta does not measure up to them. Even the venerable Kokalika cannot compare to them, for they are the most evil persons in the whole continent of Jampadvipa because they're distorting the Buddha's very words. So long as people follow their teachings, can there be any peace and safety for the nation? At the very bottom of 691. I observe these things and understand them to my own satisfaction. So in other words, everything I'm saying has come from my own Buddhahood. All right? I'm referring to the sutras when there's a point of perspective that's already been qualified, but I've qualified all this to myself to the fact that I'm not afraid to say this out loud and nobody can touch me. You can't kill me. You've already tried. Right. You can't do it. Right. All right? I observe these things and understand them to my own satisfaction, which should be enough. But among those persons in Japan who are thought to be wise, there is not a single one who understands this, and the country is thus in grave danger of destruction. It's what happens when you're the only one to have a particular new opinion about the way things are and what the truth actually is. Moreover, one must respect the admonitions of the Buddha and exercise a measure of compassion for others. This is the top first part of 692, first column. of the Buddha and exercise a measure of compassion for others. And therefore, for the sake of the country, I risk my body and life by speaking out on the matter. But the rulers of the nation are so deceived by these men that not one of them heeds my warnings. I am like someone who throws cold water on molten iron, or who tweaks the leg of a sleeping lion. Here is this priest called Two Fires. On his body he wears the three robes On his body he wears his three robes like a hide that he can never take off. And he has his one alms bowl that he guards as closely as he does his own two eyes. He meticulously observes the 250 precepts and abides by the 3,000 rules of conduct. The ignorant priests and nuns and laypersons of our time, from the rulers of the nation on down to the common people, all look upon him as though they thought he were the venerable earth repository who had made his appearance from Mount Karadia, or the venerable Mahekashayapa who had come down from the holy mountain of Eagle Peak. I myself have read the encouraging devotion chapter, as we have, right? Yeah. And in the fifth volume of the Lotus Sutra, which tells how when the world enters the latter age, the three great enemies of the Lotus Sutra will appear. These are the three powerful enemies that are prophesied in the Lotus Sutra. So he's qualifying, hey, it's the latter day of the law, and I'm feeling like I'm in rhythm with stuff here. And so I've read the encouraging devotion chapter with my life, and it seems to me that it's telling me that when the world enters this age, this is how the three great enemies of the Lotus Sutra will appear. That's what he's saying in this letter to Shimoyama. He says, and I have concluded that the third of these three enemies is none other than this man, Ryokan, Two Fires. I thought that if a suitable opportunity presented itself, I would like to attack the enemy of the nation, curb that overbearing arrogance of his, and confront him with the full might and authority of the Buddhist teachings. But the priest Two Fires sits at all times on his lofty seat, sighs, and says, I do my best to see that the priests and nuns of this country of Japan all abide by the 250 precepts and the 500 precepts, respectively, for women. Like I said, it's not just the 250, it's the 500 for women. And that the men and women lay believers all observe the 5 precepts and the 8 precepts. But Nichiren impedes the fulfillment of my wishes, because it's the latter day of the law, it's no longer time for the precepts. So my preaching is not to do any precepts. Chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay? So that's what Ryokan's attacking Nichiren on. Is he saying it's the latter day of the law? Everything you're talking about is old stuff that was already discarded long ago, and you've given an update, and you're acting like you're the original author of it, and by virtue of that, you've taken on all this power and prestige and influence, and you're misleading everyone in the wrong direction, including the leaders of the country. He says, but Nichiren impedes the fulfillment of my wishes, he says, Ryokan's complaining. Then I said to myself, Nichiren saying, I would like to decide this matter by means of actual proof. This man constantly tells people that he can cause rain to fall whenever he wills it. Let us see the proof of this. There are many examples in the past in which the power to make rain was used to determine the relative worth of doctrines, as when the great teacher Dengyo contended with Gromyo and Shubin and Kobo. And as happens, the priest Two Fires has just now been requested by the authorities to conduct prayers for rain. The prayers for rain conducted by the priest Two Fires were to begin on the 18th day of the 6th month in the 8th year of Brunei, of the Brunei era, 1271, and last until the 24th day of the same month. At that time, I sent a messenger to Gokurakuji Temple, making clear that he came from one who had caused the priest many sighs in recent. Pardon me. Let me start again. The prayers for rain conducted, middle of the second column of page 692. The prayers for rain conducted by the priest two fires were to begin on the 18th day of the 6th month in the 8th year of the Brene era, 1271, and last until the 24th day of the same month. At that time, I sent a messenger to Gokurakuji Temple, making clear that he came from one who had caused the priest many sighs in recent years. In other words, he made sure that that Ryokan knew that the messenger came from Nichiren, is what he's just saying. Okay? Making clear that he came from one who had caused the priest many sighs in recent years. Because he's gone to Gokurakuji. He's going to find Ryokan there. He says, and so the messenger says, if within the space of 7 days you can make it rain even once, then I will become your disciple. Nichiren's telling him to tell the messenger to tell Ryokan, I Nichiren will become your disciple if you can make it rain even once in the next 7 days. And I will undertake to uphold all the 250 precepts if you can do that. I stated, moreover, I will acknowledge that, so he's qualifying that was him saying that. Moreover, I will acknowledge that my condemnation of the Nimbusu as a practice that leads to the hell of incessant suffering is based on an erroneous interpretation of my own. And if I submit to you, my disciples will, of course, do likewise, as will almost all the people of Japan. So he's saying to Ryokan, make it rain, you get the big prize. I'll become your disciple.
Yeah.
And if I commit myself to you, okay, during the course of the 7 days, I 3 times sent messengers to convey these words to him. But what could have gone wrong? Not only did not a drop of rain fall, but all the 8 kinds of winds, roaring winds, howling winds, whirling winds, violent winds, raged without cease throughout the 24 hours of the day and night. Moreover, at the top of page 693, this is while Ryokan's doing all of his prayers, right? Moreover, during another 7 days, because the Daishonin says, here, I'll tell you what, I'll spot you another week. Big guy. Okay. Moreover, during another 7 days of the extended prayer period, these winds continued without stop while not a drop of rain fell. What does this mean? Izumi Shiibu was a licentious woman, and the priest, knowing, discarded the precepts, yet both by writing poems in the 21 style syllable form that the priest two fires deplores, were able to make rain fall. And that great thieving bandit of India, by reciting the words "Hail to the Buddha," managed to steal the gold head of the image of the heavenly God. Yet this priest two fire, page 693, second paragraph. Yet this priest two fires and his disciples, several hundred persons abiding by the 250 precepts and performing big and little ceremonies of the true word in the Lotus schools, proved less effective with their Buddhist prayers than did a licentious woman with her wanton poem, or a great thief with his invocation of "Hail to the Buddha." Is this not strange that somehow these two people that would seem to be in opposition to being pure and capable of having this prayer answered, had their prayer for rain answered, but it's been 2 weeks and Ryokan's not got anything done yet. So from this it should have been obvious what a great offense these men were guilty of. But on the contrary, their slanderous deeds were accepted by the authorities, and the truth of the matter never came to light. It seemed that the time had come for the country of Japan to perish. When conducting prayers for rain, if rain actually falls, the nature and aspect of the rain will indicate whether the person conducting the prayers is worthy or unworthy. There are various types of rain, such as heavenly rain, dragon rain, asura rain, coarse rain, sweet rain, and thunder rain. In the present instance, the prayers for rain, of course, no rain whatsoever fell. Moreover, for a period of 14 days, there was even more severe drought than had been previously, and great evil winds blew without cease throughout the 24 hours of the day and night. If the priest Two Fires had been a man of true sincerity, he should immediately have renounced his erroneous views and hidden himself away in the mountain forests. But far from doing that, he brazenly showed his face before his disciples and patrons and went even further by spreading slanderous words and urging the government to see that my head was cut off, so that a letter was sent to that effect. So that a letter to that effect was sent to the authorities in the province where I was exiled. He is a very evil man who would have done away with me, who would have me done away with. And yet his patrons, in their ignorance, continue to support him, thus bringing about the ruin of the nation in this existence, and ensuring that in a future existence they will fall into the hell of incessant suffering. How pitiful. Middle of page 693, second column. The Origin of the World Sutra says that because the various living beings commit wanton acts and do things that defile their purity of conduct, heaven refuses to send down rain. And it also says, because people go against the law and are guilty of greed and stinginess, jealousy, erroneous views, and perverseness, heaven sends down no rain. Again, divergent concepts in the sutras and the Vinaya texts state, there are 5 factors that will prevent rain from falling. I will omit the first 3 here. The 4th is that the rainmaker is a person of lewd and disorderly conduct. The 5th is that the ruler of the nation fails to govern according to principle, and the rainmaker is angry. Under these conditions, no rain will fall. With these passages of Scripture as our mirror, let us see what they show us about the true nature of the priest Two Fires, Ryokan. They reveal him very clearly for what he is. First, though by reputation he is an observer of the precepts, in fact, he is wanton in his conduct. Second, he is greedy and stingy. Third, he is jealous. Fourth, he holds erroneous views. Fifth, he is lewd and disorderly. All the 5 factors apply to him. These passages of Scripture at the top of page 694, first column, these passages of Scripture do not apply to the priest Two Fires alone, but to other persons of both past and present as well. Thus, when the great teacher Kobo prayed for rain, for a period of 14 days, not a drop of rain fell, a very strange outcome indeed. And yet so arrogant and overbearing was he, so deceitful in mind, that he attempted to steal the rain that the emperor had caused to fall through his prayers, and to claim that he, Kobo, had produced it. Likewise, when the Tripitaka master Shamue, Chinkong-chi, and Pukun prayed for rain, though a small amount of rain did in fact fall, in all 3 cases it was accompanied by high winds that continued to blow over a long period. It was accompanied by high winds that continued to blow over a long period until at last an imperial envoy was sent to drive the men out of the country. How pitiful they were. When the great teacher Tentai and the great teacher Dingyo prayed for rain, in no time at all, or within a mere 3 days, the god Chakra sent down rain, and no winds whatsoever accompanied it. So excellent were the results they produced. The Lotus Sutra says, or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, who will claim they are practicing the true way, despising and looking down on all humankind. Greedy for profit and support, they will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers. That's from the Encouraging Devotion chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And it says, because in the midst of the great assembly, they constantly try to defame us, they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders, as well as the other monks, slandering and speaking evil of us. Evil demons will take possession of others, and through them curse, revile, and heap shame on us. also from the Encouraging Devotion chapter of Lotus Sutra. And it says, top of the second column on page 694, the evil monks of that muddied age, failing to understand the Buddha's expedient means, how he preaches the law in accordance with what is appropriate, will confront us with foul language and angry frowns. Again and again we will banish. The Nirvana Sutra says there are Ikshatikas, or persons of incorrigible disbelief. They pretend to be arhats, living in deserted places and speaking slanderously of the correct and equal sutras of the great vehicle. When ordinary people see them, they all suppose that they are true arhats and speak of them as great bodhisattvas. When I use these passages from the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras as a Buddhist mirror and examine the image of present-day Japan as is reflected in them, then who are the priests who are revered by the rulers of the nation as though they were arhats endowed with the 6 transcendental powers? And who speak slanderous words about the votary of the Lotus Sutra who have and would have his head cut off? And who are the priests who are looked up to by the common people as though they were great bodhisattvas? And who is the wise man who for the sake of the Lotus Sutra was again and again driven from one place to another, who was cut on the 14th and who was cut on the forehead, whose disciples were killed, who was twice sent into exile, and who in the end was nearly decapitated. Of course, he's speaking of himself. The eyeless and earless may be excused, but let all those persons who have eyes and ears examine and heed these sutra passages. What persons now can say, "I've read these sutra passages, I believe in them," and yet direct all their hatred at Nichiren alone? If they truly believe these sutra passages, then let them call forth the 3 types of powerful enemies described in them and show proof that they do indeed read these passages and believe them. Unless they do so, at the very top of page 695, unless they do so, then to be angry at Nichiren, who reads and recites these passages as they are intended to be read, is to be angry at the passages themselves, is it not? And to do so is to look with contempt on the envoy of the Buddha. If the priest two fires of our present age is not to be regarded as the third of the 3 powerful enemies of the Lotus Sutra, then Shakyamuni Buddha is a teller of great falsehoods, and many treasures in the Buddhas of the 10 directions are guilty of bearing false witness. But if these sutra passages speak the truth, then without doubt the rulers of the nation will lend their support to the priest's 2 fires. Then without doubt the rulers of the nation who lend their support to the priest's 2 fires will in their present existence be abandoned by the benevolent deities that guard and protect them, and their country will become the possession of others. And in their future existence, they will be born in the Avicii hell. Because they pay honor to the very evil teaching, they conduct their affairs of government in a wholly unreasonable manner. If I try to surmise what is in the minds of these rulers with their erroneous views, I believe they must be saying Nichiren is an implacable enemy of Amida Buddha and a deadly opponent of the Buddhist halls and pagodas built by our fathers and mothers in regard to the former and the middle day teachings, not the Lotus and the Nirvana, perfect teachings. Even if we must depart from the ordinary ways of government to deal with him, we will not be going against the will of the Buddhas and the heavenly deities and the heavenly deities will surely forgive us. What foolishness, what foolishness. In other words, if you think you can get me just because 2 fires is saying that I'm a bad guy, when in fact he's the bad guy, you're the one that's mistaken, you will suffer. He says, I should perhaps go into further detail, but since this is a minor matter, I will say no more. Persons of understanding will be able to tell what I mean. But there is a far greater error than the ones I have been describing so far. this seems to be crooked, okay? All right. But there is a far greater error than the one I have been describing so far that has appeared in this country of ours. The gravest error in Japan, and one that is as far apart from the one I have been describing as clouds are from the mud. Because it has prevailed for so long, the country has been abandoned by Brahma, Chakra, and the gods of the sun and the moon, the four heavenly kings and the other heavenly gods, and the great benevolent deities who ordinarily guard and protect the nation, have, on the contrary, now become its mortal enemies. Brahma, Chakra, and others who guard and protect the Lotus Sutra have addressed the sage ruler of a neighboring country, ordering him to chastise this country of Japan so that it may fulfill the vow it took in the presence of the Buddha. Long ago, in the former and middle days of the law, the world entered a period of decline, a muddied age. But because it had only just entered such an age, the nation had not yet become disordered. Sages and worthies appeared from time to time, and there was no end to rulers and high ministers who possessed virtue and good fortune. Hence there was no deviation from proper procedure in the affairs of government, and the common people were honest and upright. In order to correct minor faults, persons such as the three sovereigns, the five emperors, the three kings, and the three sages appeared, composing codes of canons so as to ensure that the world would be well ordered. And for a time the world was indeed well ordered, but then gradually, as the sages passed, sages and worthies ceased to appear, and persons of virtue and blessing became scarce. The three calamities frequently beset the nation in great force, and the seven disasters surpassed in scale anything that earlier ages had known. The non-Buddhist codes and writings could no longer deal with the situation, and it became necessary to follow the teachings of the Buddhist scriptures so as to ensure order in the nation. Because this was done, order was in fact ensured for a time. But once more, as the world drew near to the latter age, there was a change. The evil committed by human beings became greater and more pronounced. Day by day and month by month, the ways of government fell into greater decline. The three calamities and seven disasters became more prevalent than ever, and the precepts of the Hinayana teaching no longer manifested any power to cope with the situation. At this time, in order to restore order in the age, the Hinayana precepts were set aside and the Mahayana teachings adopted. And when these, in turn, proved ineffective, a great ordination platform was set up on Mount Hiei for administering the Mahayana precepts of the perfect and immediate enlightenment of the Lotus Sutra. And thus, in this way, order was restored. In effect, the great teacher Dengyo, in this way, dismissed and put an end to the three ordination platforms where the Hinayana precepts had in the past been administered, and also dispatched with the Mahayana precepts administered by the Flower Garland Three Treatises and Dharma Characteristics schools. This great teacher not only refuted the doctrines of the six earlier schools of Buddhism, but also made a thorough study of the teachings of the Zen school. By the way, I have point 37, the superscript 37. You should look that up. There's a reason why I have that in bold for me. But also made a thorough study of the teachings of the Zen school. In addition, he investigated the doctrines of the Lotus and True Word schools, which at the time had not yet been widely propagated in Japan. Examining them in the mirror of Buddhist doctrine as a whole to determine their relative worth, he found that the he found that the distinction between the exoteric and esoteric teachings became as clear as black and white. But because this alone was not sufficient to dispel the doubts of the age, in the Enrakuji era, he embarked on a journey to Tang, China. The Chinese, however, though sagacious in other matters, had not yet made clear the relative worth of the Tendai and True Word schools and the tests on which they were based, the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavajrana Sutra, respectively, or determined which was the more profound. Therefore, after the great teacher Dengyo returned to Japan, he expounded his ideas in accordance with these with his earlier conclusions. As proof that the Tentai teachings are superior to those of the true word, he cited the passage in the 10th volume of the great teacher Myolo's annotations on the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, in which Han Kuang tells how his teacher, the Tripitaka master Pukung, in late years abandoned the true word teachings and converted to those of the great teacher Tentai. That citation is found in Dingyo's clarification on the schools based on Tentai's doctrine. In addition, he asserted that the true word school did not deserve to be called a school at all. Mm-hmm. He gave as his reason the fact that he had discovered that the three true word masters, Shan Wu Wei, Qing Kong Chi, and Pukung, had duped Acharya Ishin by stealing the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, which was based on the personal enlightenment of the great teacher Tentai, and asserting that it was to be found in the Mahevajrana Sutra, thus committing this gross error and deception of taking a treasure that belonged to someone else and claiming it as their own. In other words, they stole the truth of Ichen and Sunzen. In similar fashion, he perceived that the Dharma teacher Cheng Quan, this is Dingyo, observed and came to the conclusion. In similar fashion, he perceived that the Dharma teacher Cheng Quan had stolen the 10 ways of observing the mind expounded by the great teacher Tentai in his great concentration and insight, incorporating them into his own flower garland school, and then turning around and claiming that the Tendai school represents the branch teachings. Okay, so Dingyo discovered all of this monkey business going on with, again, these great sages stealing teachings and applying to their own schools, and then saying that their own schools were the originators of these thoughts, and that the Tentai school had stolen them. All right, so at the top of page 697, and we're almost done here for today. The great teacher Dingyo, having denied the true word the right to call itself a school, okay, he qualified it's not really a school, it's made up shit, all right, taught that there were only 7 schools of Buddhism, the 6 earlier schools and the Tendai school. The priest known as the great teacher Kobo, however, a man of great falsehoods, who was given to praising himself and defaming others after the demise of the great teacher Dingyo, while ever confronting his opponents in debate, succeeded in deceiving the members of the imperial court, and thus was able to establish the true word teachings as the 8th school. This was Onoji at the bottom of Mount Hei. In Rakuji's at the top. He did Onoji. That's the true word teachings, right? Mm-hmm. Despite this, middle of page 697, first column. Despite this fact, the men who carried on the teaching line of their original teacher Dingyo on Mount Hei should have asserted, this would have been Jikaku and Chisho, they should have stood up for Dingyo's original definition and clarification that the true word was no, and that the precepts was no, and that the Amida stuff was no. Okay? He says, despite this fact, the middle of page 697, the men who carried on the teaching line of their original teacher Dingyo, which would be Chisho and Jikaku, or Jikaku and Chisho in that order, on Mount Hei, should have asserted that there were only 7 schools. Among these were 2 men, however, who journeyed to China, the great teacher Jikaku, 3rd disciple of the great teacher Dingyo, and the great teacher Chisho, a latter disciple of the Reverend Gishin. Gishin is a precepts guy, right? The first chief priest of Mount Hei. At that time, the question of the relative worth of the Tendai or Tendai and true word teachings was a prime subject of controversy and debate in Japan. And therefore, whenever these men met with outstanding Therefore, whenever these men met with outstanding Tentai or true word leaders in China, they invariably questioned them as to the relative superiority and profundity of the two teachings. But among the renowned masters of the time, there were some who declared the true word teachings to be superior, others who favored the Tentai teachings, some who held the two teachings to be equal in value, and some who asserted they were alike in terms of principle but different in practice. None, however, could produce clear passages of Scripture to support their contentions. Whichever teaching they favored, they were speaking out of mere conjecture. The great teacher Jikaku returned to Japan without pursuing his studies thoroughly, and after his return wrote some 14 volumes of commentary on the Scriptures. These consisted of a 7-volume commentary on the Diamond Crown Sutra and a 7-volume commentary on the Sudhikara Sutra. In essence, these commentaries assert that the Lotus Sutra and the 3 True Word Sutras, the Mahavajrana, Diamond Crown, Sudhikara, are alike in terms of principle but differ in practice. In these commentaries, Jikaku based his writings on the fundamental ideas put forth in the annotations on the Mahavajrana Sutra and the commentary on the meaning of the Mahavajrana Sutra, but he was not entirely certain of the correctness of his teachings. Therefore, it is said he placed his commentaries before the image of the Buddha and prayed that he might be informed whether or not they conformed to the Buddha's will. He then dreamed that he shot an arrow that struck the sun. Awakening with a start, he took the dream to be an auspicious omen and declared that there was now no longer any doubt about the superiority of the true word teachings. He requested that the emperor issue an edict to this effect. Jikaku was waiting for the edict to be circulated throughout Japan when he suddenly fell victim to the plague, and within the space of 4 months his earthly existence came to an end. The great teacher Chisho saw himself as a disciple of Jikaku and acted on his behalf, following Jikaku's deathbed instructions and requesting that an imperial edict be issued saying true word is the deal. The edict was to state that the true word and Lotus Sutra teachings were of equal standing, comparable to the 2 wings of a bird or the 2 eyes of a human being, and that Mount Hei should give recognition to all 8 schools of Buddhism, including the Zen. Though the bodies of these 2 men, Jikaku and Chisho, rested among the clouds of Mount Hei, their minds mingled in the dust of the Toji Temple in the capital. They appeared to be carrying on in the lineage of their original teacher Dingyo, but in fact they were betraying the correct principles taught by that sage. From the passage in the Lotus Sutra that states, among the sutras, if the Lotus Sutra holds the highest place, they deleted the word highest and relegated the sutra to a position inferior to that of the Mahavajrana Sutra. They acted not only as deadly enemies of the great teacher Dingyo, but astonishingly enough, as the foes of Shakyamuni, many treasures, the emanations Buddhas of the 10 directions, the thus come one Mahavajrana, and all other Buddhas. This was the real meaning of the dream. This was the real meaning of the dream in which the great teacher Jikaku shot an arrow at the sun. This was the beginning of the great error in the Buddhist teachings. Jikaku and then Chisho taking Mount Hei down with true word and precepts and other things other than Tentai. It was an omen foretelling that Japan would become a doomed nation, for the Lotus Sutra, which should have been the roof beam of the country, was thereby reduced to acting as a mere rafter or support to the Mahavajrana Sutra. And I'll stop there on page 698.
698.
Okay? 698 in the political realm too. And that's when he goes into a differing... I know, honey, they're in there. I know what that is, very much what that is. Okay? All right.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you.